Samadhipada. Now, the teachings of yoga are presented. Yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind. When that is accomplished, the seer abides in its own true nature. Otherwise, at other times, the seer is absorbed in the changing states of the mind. There are 5 kinds of changing states of the mind, and they are either detrimental or non-detrimental to the practice of yoga. These 5 vrittis are right knowledge, error, imagination, sleep, and memory. Right knowledge consists of sense perception, logic, and verbal testimony. Error is false knowledge stemming from the incorrect apprehension of something. Metaphor consists of the usage of words that are devoid of an actual object. Deep sleep is that state of mind which is based on an absence of any content. Memory is the retention of images of sense objects that have been experienced. The vritti states of mind are stilled by practice and dispassion. From these, practice is the effort to be fixed in concentrating the mind. Practice becomes firmly established when it has been cultivated uninterruptedly and with devotion over a prolonged period of time. Dispassion is the controlled consciousness of one who is without craving for sense objects, whether they are actually perceived or described in Scripture. Higher than renunciation is indifference to the gunas themselves. This stems from perception of the Purusha, soul. Samprajnata Samadhi consists of the consecutive mental stages of absorption with physical awareness, absorption with subtle awareness, absorption with bliss, and absorption with the sense of I-ness. The other samadhi, asamprajnata samadhi, is preceded by cultivating the determination to terminate all thoughts. In this state, only latent impressions remain. For some, those who are unembodied and those who are merged in matter, the state of samprajnata is characterized by absorption in subtle states of prakriti. But for others, the state where only subconscious impressions remain is preceded by faith, vigor, memory, samadhi absorption, and discernment. This state of samprajnata is near for those who apply themselves intensely. Even among these, there is further differentiation of this intensity into degrees of mild, mediocre, and ardent. Or, this previously mentioned state is attainable from devotion to the Lord. The Lord is a special soul. He is untouched by the obstacles to the practice of yoga. Karma, the fructification of karma, and subconscious predispositions. In him, the seed of omniscience is unsurpassed. Ishvara was also the teacher of the ancients, because he is not limited by time. The name designating him is the mystical symbol Om. Its repetition and the contemplation of its meaning should be performed. From this comes the realization of the inner consciousness and freedom from all disturbances. These disturbances are disease, idleness, doubt, carelessness, sloth, lack of detachment, misapprehension, failure to attain a base for concentration, and instability. They are distractions for the mind. Suffering, dejection, trembling, inhalation, and exhalation accompany the distractions. Practice of fixing the mind on one object should be performed in order to eliminate these disturbances. By cultivating an attitude of friendship toward those who are happy, compassion towards those in distress, joy toward those who are virtuous, and equanimity towards those who are non-virtuous, lucidity arises in the mind. Or, stability of mind is gained by exhaling and retaining the breath. Or else, focus on a sense object arises, and this causes steadiness of the mind. Or, steadiness of mind is gained when the mind is pain-free and luminous. Or, the mind becomes steady when it has one who is free from desire as its object. Or, the mind can become steady when it has the knowledge attained from sleep and dreams as its support. Or, steadiness of the mind is attained from meditation upon anything of one's inclination. The yogi's mastery extends from the smallest particle of matter to the totality of matter. Samapatti, complete absorption of the mind when it is free from vrittis, occurs when the mind becomes like a transparent jewel, taking the form of whatever object is placed before it, whether the object be the knower, the instrument of knowledge, or the object of knowledge. In this stage, savitarka samapatti, samadhi absorption with physical awareness, is intermixed with the notions of word, meaning, and idea. Nirvitarka samapatti, absorption without conceptualization, occurs when memory has been purged and the mind is empty, as it were, of its own reflective nature. Now only the object of meditation shines forth in its own right. The states of samadhi with subtle awareness and without subtle awareness, whose objects of focus are the subtle nature of things, are explained in the same manner. The subtle nature of things extends all the way up to Prakriti. These above-mentioned samapatti states are known as samadhi meditative absorption with seed. Upon attaining the clarity of nirvichara samadhi, there is lucidity of the inner self. In that state, there is truth-bearing wisdom. It, seedless samadhi, has a different focus from that of inference and sacred scripture, because it has the particularity of things as its object. The samskaras born out of that truth-bearing wisdom obstruct other samskaras from emerging. Upon the cessation of even those truth-bearing samskaras, nirbija samadhi, seedless meditative absorption, ensues. Thus ends the first chapter on samadhi in the Yoga Sutras composed by Patañjali. Sadhana Pada. Kriya Yoga, the path of action, consists of self-discipline, study, and dedication to the Lord. The yoga of action is for bringing about samadhi and for weakening the impediments to yoga. The impediments to samadhi are nescience ego, desire, aversion, and clinging to life. Ignorance is the breeding ground of the other kleshas, whether they are in a dormant, weak, intermittent, or fully activated state. Ignorance is the notion that takes the self, which is joyful, pure, and eternal, to be the non-self, which is painful, unclean, and temporary. Ego is to consider the nature of the seer and the nature of the instrumental power of seeing to be the same thing. Attachment stems from experiences of happiness. Aversion stems from experiences of pain. The tendency of clinging to life affects even the wise. It is an inherent tendency. These kleshas are subtle. They are destroyed when the mind dissolves back into its original matrix. The states of mind produced by these kleshas are eliminated by meditation. The stalk of karma has the kleshas as its root. It is experienced in present or future lives. As long as the root of kleshas exists, it fructifies as type of birth, span of life, and life experience of an individual. These, the type of birth, span of life, and life experience, bear the fruits of pleasure and pain, as a result of the performance of virtue and vice. For one who has discrimination, everything is suffering on account of the suffering produced by the consequences of action, by pain itself, and by the samskaras, as well as on account of the suffering ensuing from the turmoil of the vrittis due to the gunas. Suffering that has yet to manifest is to be avoided. The conjunction between the seer and that which is seen is the cause of suffering to be avoided. That which is knowable has the nature of illumination, activity, and inertia, sattva, rajas, and tamas. It consists of the senses and the elements, and exists for the purpose of providing either liberation or experience to Purusha. The different stages of the guna qualities consist of the particularized, the unparticularized, the distinctive, and the indistinctive. The seer is merely the power of seeing. However, although pure, he witnesses the images of mind. The essential nature of that which is seen is exclusively for the sake of the seer. Although the seen ceases to exist for one whose purpose is accomplished, the liberated Purusha, it has not yet ceased to exist altogether, since it is common to other non-liberated Purushas. The notion of conjunction is the means of understanding the real nature of the powers of the possessed and of the possessor. The cause of conjunction is ignorance. By the removal of ignorance, conjunction is removed. This is the absolute freedom of the seer. The means to liberation is uninterrupted discriminative discernment. The yogi's true insight has 7 ultimate stages. Upon the destruction of impurities as a result of the practice of yoga, the lamp of knowledge arises. This culminates in discriminative discernment. The 8 limbs are abstentions, observances, posture, breath control, disengagement of the senses, concentration, meditation, and absorption. The yamas are nonviolence, truthfulness, refrainment from stealing, celibacy, and renunciation of unnecessary possessions. These yamas are considered the great vow. They are not exempted by one's class, place, time, or circumstance. They are universal. The observances are cleanliness, contentment, austerity, study of Scripture, and devotion to God. Upon being harassed by negative thoughts, one should cultivate counteracting thoughts. Negative thoughts are violence, etc. They may be personally performed on one's behalf by another, or authorized by oneself. They may be triggered by greed, anger, or delusion, and they may be slight, moderate, or extreme in intensity. One should cultivate counteracting thoughts, namely, that the end results of negative thoughts are ongoing suffering and ignorance. In the presence of one who is established in nonviolence, enmity is abandoned. When one is established in truthfulness, one ensures the fruition of actions. When one is established in refrainment from stealing, all jewels manifest. Upon the establishment of celibacy, power is attained. When refrainment from covetousness becomes firmly established, knowledge of the whys and wherefores of births manifests. By cleanliness, one develops distaste for one's body and the cessation of contact with others. Upon the purification of the mind, one attains cheerfulness, one-pointedness, sense control, and fitness to perceive the self. From contentment, the highest happiness is attained. From austerity, on account of the removal of impurities, the perfection of the senses and body manifests. From study of Scripture, a connection with one's deity of choice is established. From submission to God comes the perfection of samadhi. Posture should be steady and comfortable. Such posture should be attained by the relaxation of effort and by absorption in the infinite. From this, one is not afflicted by the dualities of the opposites. When that asana is accomplished, pranayama, breath control, follows. This consists of the regulation of the incoming and outgoing breaths. Pranayama manifests as external, internal, and restrained movements of breath. These are drawn out and subtle in accordance to place, time, and number. The fourth type of pranayama surpasses the limits of the external and the internal. Then, the covering of the illumination of knowledge is weakened. Additionally, the mind becomes fit for concentration. Pratyahara, withdrawal from sense objects, occurs when the senses do not come into contact with their respective sense objects. It corresponds, as it were, to the nature of the mind when it is withdrawn from the sense objects. From this comes the highest control of the senses. Thus ends the second chapter on sadhana in the Yoga Sutras composed by Patañjali. Vibhuti-pada. Concentration is the fixing of the mind in one place. Meditation is the one-pointedness of the mind on one image. Samadhi is when that same dhyana shines forth as the object alone, and the mind is devoid of its own reflective nature. When these three are performed together, it is called samyama. From samyama comes insight. Samyama is applied on the different stages of samadhi. These three, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi are internal limbs compared to the previous limbs of yoga. Yet, even these are external limbs in relation to seedless samadhi. The state of restraint, nirodha, is when there is disappearance of outgoing, i.e., worldly, samskaras, and the appearance of restraining samskaras. These emerge in the mind at the moment of restraint. The mind's undisturbed flow occurs due to samskaras. The attainment of the samadhi state involves the elimination of all pointedness, wandering of the mind, and the rise of one-pointedness, concentration. In that regard, the attainment of one-pointedness occurs when the image in the mind that has just passed is the same as the image in the mind that is present. In this way, the change in the characteristics, state, and condition of objects and of the senses is explained. The substratum is that which underpins past, present, and future. The change in the sequence of characteristics is the cause of the change in transformation of objects. When samyama is performed on the three transformations of characteristics, state, and condition, knowledge of the past and the future ensues. Due to the correlation among word, meaning, and idea, confusion ensues. By performing samyama on them separately, knowledge of the speech of all creatures arises. By bringing previous samskaras into direct perception comes the knowledge of previous births. From their ideas, one can attain knowledge of others' minds. That knowledge is not accompanied by its object, since this object is not the object of the yogi's mind. By performing samyama on the outer form of the body, invisibility is attained. This occurs when perceptibility is obstructed by blocking contact between light and the eyes. Karma is either quick to fructify or slow. By samyama on karma, or on portents, knowledge of one's death arises. By samyama on friendliness and such things, strengths are acquired. By practicing samyama on strengths, the yogi attains the strength of an elephant. By directing the light of cognition, one obtains knowledge of subtle, concealed, and remote things. By performing samyama on the sun arises knowledge of the different realms in the universe. By samyama on the moon, knowledge of the solar systems. By samyama on the pole star comes knowledge of the movement of the stars. By samyama on the navel plexus of the body comes knowledge of the arrangement of the body. By samyama on the pit of the throat comes the cessation of hunger and thirst. By samyama on the subtle tortoise channel, steadiness is attained. By samyama on the light in the skull, a vision of the siddhas, perfected beings, is attained. By samyama on the heart, knowledge of the mind ensues. Worldly experience consists of the notion that there is no distinction between the Purusha self and pure intelligence, although these two are completely distinct. Worldly experience exists for another, for Purusha. By samyama on that which exists for itself, on Purusha, comes knowledge of Purusha. From this, intuition, as well as higher hearing, touch, vision, taste, and smell are born. These powers are accomplishments for the mind that is outgoing, but obstacles to samadhi. By loosening the cause of bondage and by knowledge of the passageways of the mind can enter into the bodies of others. By mastery over the Udana vital air, one attains the power of levitation and does not come into contact with water, mud, and thorns. By mastery over the Samana vital air, radiance is attained. By samyama on the relationship between the organ of hearing and the ether, divine hearing is attained. By performing samyama on the relationship between the body and the ether, or by performing samapati on the lightness of cotton, one acquires the ability to travel through the sky. The state of mind projected outside of the body, which is not an imagined state, is called the great out-of-body experience. By this, covering of the light of buddhi is destroyed. By samyama on the gross nature, essential nature, subtle nature, constitution, and purpose of objects, one attains mastery over the elements. As a result of this, there are no limitations on account of the body's natural abilities. Mystic powers such as anima, etc., manifest, and the body attains perfection. The perfection of the body consists of possessing beauty, charm, strength, and the power of a thunderbolt. By the performance of samyama on the process of knowing, on the essence of the sense organs, on ego, on inherence, the gunas, and on the purpose of the gunas, comes control over the senses. As a result of this, comes speed like the speed of mind, activity independent of the bodily senses, and mastery over primordial matter. Only for one who discerns the difference between the Purusha and the intellect do omniscience and omnipotence accrue. By detachment even from this attainment, omniscience and omnipotence, and upon the destruction of all the seeds of all faults, kaivalya, the supreme liberation ensues. If solicited by celestial beings, the yogi should not become smug, because the tendency towards undesirable consequences can once again manifest. By performing samyama on the moment and its sequence, one attains knowledge born of discrimination. As a result of this, there is discernment of two comparable things that are not distinguishable by species, characteristics, or location. Knowledge born of discrimination is a liberator. It has everything as its object at all times simultaneously. When the purity of the intellect is equal to that of the Purusha, kaivalya liberation ensues. Thus ends the third chapter on Vibhuti in the Yoga Sutras composed by Patañjali. Kaivalya Pada. The mystic powers arise due to birth, herbs, mantras, the performance of austerity, and samadhi. The changes in bodily forms that take place in other births is due to the filling in by Prakriti. The instrumental cause of creation is not its creative cause, but it pierces the covering from creation like a farmer pierces the barriers between his fields. Created minds are made from ego only. There is one mind, among the many created by the yogi, which is the director in the different activities of the different bodies. From these 5 types of minds that possess siddhis, the one born of meditation is without the storehouse of karma. The karma of a yogi is neither white nor black. Of everyone else, it is of 3 types. From these 3 types of karma, the activation of only those subliminal impressions that are ready for fruition in the next life occurs. Because they are identical, there is an uninterrupted connection between memory and samskara, even though they might be separated by birth, time, and place. The samskaras are eternal, because the desire for life is eternal. Since samskaras are held together by immediate cause, motive, the mind, and the object of awareness, the samskaras cease when the latter cease. The past and the future exist in reality, since they differ from the present only in terms of the time of manifestation of their characteristics. The past, present, and future have the gunas as their essence, and are either manifest or latent. The things of the world are objectively real, due to the uniformity of the gunas that underpin all change. Because there is a multiplicity of minds perceiving an object, but yet the object remains consistent, there is a difference in nature between the object and the mind of the observer. An object is not dependent on a single mind for its existence. If it were, then what happens to it when it is not perceived by that particular mind? A thing is either known or not known by the mind, depending on whether it is noticed by the mind. The permutations of the mind are always known to its Lord, the Purusha soul, because of the soul's unchanging nature. Nor is the mind self-illuminating, because of its nature as the object of perception. There cannot be discernment of both the mind and the object it perceives at the same time. If the mind were cognized by another mind, then there would be an infinite regress of one intelligence being known by another intelligence. Moreover, there would also be confusion of memory. Although it is unchanging, consciousness becomes aware of its own intelligence by means of pervading the forms assumed by the intelligence. The mind, colored by the seer, as well as by that which is seen, knows all objects. That mind, with its countless variegated subliminal impressions, exists for another entity other than itself, because it operates in conjunction with other instruments. For one who sees the distinction between the mind and the soul, reflecting on the nature of the self ceases. At that point, the mind, inclined towards discrimination, gravitates towards ultimate liberation. During the intervals in this state of discriminative awareness, other ideas arise because of previous samskaras. The removal of these previous samskaras is said to be like the removal of the klesha afflictions. For one who has no interest, even in the fruits of meditative wisdom, on account of the highest degree of discriminative insight, the samadhi called Dharma Megha, cloud of virtue, ensues. From this comes the cessation of the kleshas, impediments to yoga, and karma. At this point, because of the unlimited nature of knowledge, when all impurities have been removed from it, that which remains to be known is little. As a result, there is a cessation of the ongoing permutations of the gunas, their purpose now fulfilled. The progression of any object through time corresponds to a series of moments. It is perceivable at the final moment of change. Ultimate liberation is when the gunas, devoid of any purpose for the Purusha, return to their original latent state. In other words, when the power of consciousness is situated in its own essential nature. Thus ends the 4th chapter on Samadhi in the Yoga Sutras, composed by Patanjali.